Hi, Dave Kanicki here with the Farm Equipment Editor's blog for December 11th, 2012. Talk about the good old days and things we probably will never see again. During the last month or so, Mike Lessiter and I had the enviable task of interviewing four now retired farm equipment legends who were a big part of some of the best and worst times in this business. We've prepared a special report that looks back at a lot of the events that changed how farm equipment dealers do business and shape the dealership of the future. These sea changes in the farm equipment business over the last 4 decades are told through the eyes of Bob Ratliff of AGCO, Jim Irwin of Case IH, Charlie Gauss of John Deere, and Al Ryder of New Holland. Each had their own take on how we got to where we are, but it was one story that Charlie Gauss told that made me think about how things used to be, for better or worse, when I was young and how they'll never be again. I asked Charlie how Deere got to be the big kid on the block and why farmers still feel so much loyalty to the green and yellow equipment. He said it was a lot of things, but basically it was because the company and its dealers took care of the customers really well. Then he told me a story of when he was a young trainee with Deere and was visiting a Deere dealer in southwest Kansas. Charlie said, that dealer and I called on a farmer, and that farmer's father came over and wanted to meet me because I was a young guy with John Deere. He said to me, you know, during the 30s, I had no money, I had a family, and I couldn't make a damn thing grow. Then he related a story about how a bill collector from John Deere came by one day and said, sir, you owe us money for a Model D tractor you bought. The farmer said, I can't pay you anything. I can hardly keep my family alive. That John Deere guy said, well, I sure understand, but when you can, we sure would appreciate you sending us some money. That old farmer shook my hand and said, do you think I'll ever run anything but John Deere? And then he drove off. I think we have a history of doing the right thing, Gauss says. I hope the company keeps doing that. Now here's my story about the good old days. I was 23 and not too long out of college. I was working as a laborer at a General Motors foundry in Michigan. The auto industry was booming and I was working so much overtime I didn't know what to do with the money. I had been driving my dad's car, but he wanted it back, so I needed to buy my own. I got talked into buying a brand new 1974 Pontiac Grand Le Mans. It was $5,600 and a lot more than I ever dreamt of paying for a car, but it was so cool. 6 months later, the auto industry went bust and about half of the foundry got laid off, including me. There was no way I could make that car payment, so I took it back to the dealer and told him he needed to take it back. I told him my story and he told me to have a seat. About 10 minutes later, he came back and said, give me the keys to the car. I did, and he handed me another set and said, okay, I'll take it back and you won't have any more car payments. Then he added, you can have that used Vega over there so you've got something to drive. I shook his hand, smiled, and said, thank you, sir. I drove that Vega for nearly 3 years without a problem or a payment. When I was back working and able to afford it, I went back to that dealer and bought a used Pontiac Ventura and paid cash. If I had stayed in Michigan, I would have bought all of my cars from that dealer as long as he was alive. That's a true story. But unlike Charlie's farmer, whose loyalty was to the equipment brand, mine was to the dealer who got me out of trouble. I wouldn't refer to either one of these examples as the good old days, but there was something good about them, something that reminds me how good it can be even in the toughest of times. Anyway, you can read about how the way dealers do business has changed in the past 4 decades or so, and what forced those changes in the January issue of Farm Equipment. Thanks for checking in, and I'll talk to you next time.